two long-running franchises get soft reboots with the help of time travel. It's Star Trek 2009 versus X-Men Days of Future Past.
In the face of extinction, it is only logical I resign my Starfleet commission and help rebuild our race.
And yet you can be in two places at once.
So, you suggest that I remain with Starfleet while you go to New Vulcan and repopulate our species? Oh yes, I can't wait. How do you intend to do that?
You mentioned the ratio of 10 women to each man. Wouldn't that necessitate the abandonment of the so-called monogamous sexual relationship?
But it is, a sacrifice required. I hasten to add that since each man will be required to do prodigious service along these lines, the women will have to be selected for their sexual characteristics, which will have to be of a highly stimulating nature.
Can we switch spots?
Live long and suck it, Zachary Quinto.
Star Trek has a very clear preference for Kirk and Spock. These are the two we see grow up and develop. Chris Pine as Kirk, in many ways, plays the broader aspects of Kirk. The guy who sleeps around and is cavalier to the point of being harmful to himself and others. We get glimpses of the more intelligent man we see in the show and the previous movies.
Oh, you're a cadet, you're studying, what's your focus?
Xenolinguistics. You have no idea what that means.
Study of alien languages, morphology, phonology, syntax. Means you've got a talented tongue.
It's easy to classify Kirk by his broad points because they stand out, but he also has a bit more to him that we only get the briefest peeks of here. Spock actually has the most clear arc of all the characters. He has dedicated his life to the Vulcan belief in logic, yet is constantly driven by emotions he refuses to acknowledge.
Live long and prosper.
It's only when he realizes these emotions are driving him does he step aside and let cooler heads take over. Kirk doesn't really have an arc. He essentially is just a rebel that constantly gets into trouble, but never actually has to suffer the penalties for his activities. He gets into a fight at a bar, and his punishment is having Pike offer him a spot in Starfleet. He cheats on the Kobayashi Maru, and his punishment is having McCoy give him a vaccine that will allow him to sneak aboard the Enterprise. While there, Pike decides to make him first officer.
Kirk, I'm promoting you to first officer.
What? Captain?
He disagrees with Spock's plan, and he's put on an escape pod and launched towards a planet, which actually seems completely over the top at that moment.
Get him off this ship.
But then he ends up encountering Spock Prime and Scotty, so it feels less like a punishment and more like an incredible plot convenience. More on that later. The conveniences continue since Sky just so happens to be the one engineer that can beam them onto the Enterprise with Spock Prime's help.
Imagine that. It never occurred to me to think of space as the thing that was moving.
Good thing they were both on that planet. Back on the Enterprise, Kirk eggs Spock into a fight.
What is it like not to feel anger or heartbreak? Or the need to stop at nothing to avenge the death of the woman who gave birth to you?
Back away from
You
me.
feel nothing! It must not even compute for you.
And his punishment is he gets to take over the ship.
Now we've got no captain and no goddamn first officer to replace him.
Yeah, we do.
What?
Pike made him first officer.
You gotta be kidding me.
He has never allowed any real defeat in this movie. His worst defeats just end up being victories. He has nothing to learn. Pike even tells him he could be an officer in 4 years and have his own ship in 8. Kirk arrogantly tells him that he'll do it in 3. And guess what happens? He, for some reason, goes from that cadet that cheated on a test to captain of the Enterprise. I get him being rewarded for stopping Nero, but this is way too much. Days of Future Past doesn't skimp on the heroes. I can't even use the rule of the title, since we have a whole team of future X-Men that literally are there for fan service. So to identify who the main X-Men are in this film, you have to look at the screen time and their arc in the movie. Therefore, the heroes of this movie are James McAvoy as Charles Xavier, Nicholas Hoult as Beast, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique. As I will get more in depth about the themes of second chances later, all these characters get their second chance and choose to do better. Xavier essentially has a drug addiction. Technically, it's a medicine made by Beast to return his ability to walk that has the side effect of suppressing his powers, but it's also an injection that he uses to dull his pain that he uses in excess. It's clearly a drug addiction.
I wanted to help do something, so I designed the serum to treat his spine, derived from the same formula that helps me control my mutation. He takes too much.
And he has to decide whether to continue ignoring his problems and dulling his pain, or whether to face his pain head-on and learn from it. Beast's arc is very closely related to Charles. In many ways, Charles is his mentor, so he's just an enabler to Charles's drug problem. He has to learn that you can't be passive when there's a problem.
Probably not supposed to ask this kind of thing, but in the future, do I make it?
No. But we can change it.
Mystique spends most of the movie as the villain, but squarely puts herself in the hero camp when she chooses to save Trask's life and a lot of others, rather than kill him. All these characters take advantage of the second chance that Wolverine gives them, which makes Wolverine's placement here a bit befuddling. He is clearly a hero and probably has more screen time than anyone else in the movie, yet he has no arc. The Wolverine at the beginning of this movie and at the end of the movie are the same person. It won't have been cliche, but perhaps a bit where he doesn't think people are capable of major changes quickly. Sure, he's learned that people can change, but not in the matter of days that they need to alter the future. He says he'll do his best, but he feels that this mission is doomed to failure. Future Charles simply tells him that Wolverine's best is good enough. That way, when Wolverine tells this to young Xavier, we really get a sense that while Wolverine teaches others of the change they have to make, he is also learning and changing himself. As is, Wolverine volunteers for the plan almost immediately without any hesitation. The only reason the movie works so well with this key element missing is because Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is a major highlight of every movie he's in, and this one is not an exception. I really like Chris Pine's Kirk. He feels like how someone presented like Kirk would really be, rather than the raw ham known as William Shatner's overacting. That being said, his lack of any real character arc is a critical loss for Star Trek. They actually handle Spock a lot better, whereas Days of Future Past has a lot more major characters and only one missing an arc. That gives the point to Marvel.
I'll do my best.
Your best is enough. Trust me.
The typical way that you can tell the heroes of the movie from the villains is that the heroes follow the themes. The villains don't. Michael Fassbender's Magneto takes his second chance and flushes it down the toilet. The team does an elaborate break-in and frees him from his Pentagon prison. He is given perhaps the clearest second chance of anyone in the movie, yet he uses it to betray his friends and try to start a mutant-human war. It's exactly what he should do for the themes, yet this is the third time he's done this. He betrayed the X-Men in X-Men 2 and tried to start a war. He betrayed the X-Men in X-Men First Class and tried to start a war. He should do what he does in Days of Future Past for the story to work, yet it feels so stale at this point. Fassbender is a great Magneto, but the character is constantly given a chance to redeem himself in this series, and he constantly betrays them, with the exception of X-Men Apocalypse, which has a whole new set of issues. In Star Trek, we get Eric Bana as Nero. Eric Bana is a great actor, but Nero is a rather thankless role. There was actually a prequel comic book that fleshes out his character more, but that's not part of the movie, and you shouldn't have to do research to learn if your villain is good. And here he is. He's very lacking. He's essentially another Khan who wants revenge against Spock for failing to save his homeworld and his family.
I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames before I give him up.
Spock! That makes sense. However, this is a ship that was launched back in time. Romulus is alive and well here in this time. Yet, rather than save the planet from the imminent destruction he knows is coming, he thinks it's better to sit and wait over 20 years for Spock to appear in this timeline. Nero could prevent the destruction of his homeworld and save his family, or get revenge, and he chooses revenge. Plus, his entire crew is apparently on board with no questions. Even Khan's crew questioned his pursuit of Kirk once they had gotten the Genesis device.
No, sir! You have Genesis! You can have whatever you... Full power!
I rather hate how Magneto is just doing the same betrayal and turn evil that he's done in way too many of these movies.
Eric,
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
But at least it works for the arc. Nero is just a madman who seeks revenge to the point of apparently sitting around for decades, waiting for his moment and literally doing nothing. I know there's a deleted scene explaining where he was, but that means nothing since it's deleted, and even if it was in the movie, it just explains where they were, not why or how. Point for Marvel.
So you were always an asshole.
The supporting characters in Star Trek are pretty much the rest of the recast crew. Zoe Saldana as Uhura, Carl Urban as McCoy, John Cho as Sulu, Simon Pegg as Scotty, Anton Yelchin as Chekhov. Plus you also get Bruce Greenwood as Captain Pike and Leonard Nimoy as Spock Prime. Tyler Perry is also there for some completely baffling reason. Everyone does a fantastic job. It is amazing to get one last full performance from Nimoy as his iconic character. Greenwood never does a bad job. Urban is phenomenal as McCoy. He doesn't look anything like DeForest Kelly besides being a white guy with darkish hair, but he nails this performance so well.
Back home, we got a saying. If you're gonna ride in the Kentucky Derby, you don't leave your prize stallion in the stable.
The key to why these characters work, despite them being recast from their legendary versions, is because they each get a little time to shine. The script gives them all their moment, making the character feel real. In X-Men Days of Future Past, we have Peter Dinklage as Bolivar Trask, Evan Peters as Quicksilver, Patrick Stewart as older Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen as older Magneto, Halle Berry as Storm, Ellen Page as Shadowcat, Shawn Ashmore as Iceman, Anna Paquin as Rogue, Omar Sy as Bishop, Daniel Cudmore as Colossus, Bingbing Fan as Blink, Patrick Swayze as Dalton, and Lucas Till as Havoc. There's actually a lot more characters in this movie. I could go on and on. However, to this movie's credit, it doesn't feel overloaded. Most of these characters are just future X-Men who are essentially just cannon fire to help Shadowcat and Wolverine complete their mission. Not many actually get very much with meat. The most significant character has to be Trask. He's despicable, but of course he doesn't see himself that way.
Never before, in all of human history, has there been a cause which could unite us as a species. Until now.
You really hate mutants, Doctor, don't you?
He thinks he's paving the way to future peace by helping humans wipe out the mutant threat. It actually sounds very reasonable if you ignore the genocide and the victims of his experiments. Trask can give all the explanations he wants. He's still a murderer. Still, the fact that he sees himself as a hero humanizes him, and Dinklage, as always, gives a great performance. Quicksilver gets a great bit, which is very cool. I'll go over it more in visuals and action. Quicksilver's greatest failing is that he's amazing for one scene, but rather than ask him to help them with the rest of their mission, they just say bye and he's out of the movie. If you're wondering why that is, it's because his stuff was added when the court ruled that both Marvel and Fox had the movie rights to Quicksilver, and Fox wanted to use the character before Marvel used him in Avengers Age of Ultron. The future characters don't get much, with most of it going to Xavier and Shadowcat, but a bit sprinkled in for Magneto, Storm, and Iceman. Xavier helps his younger self, while Shadowcat gets a bit more because of her role in the original comic book. Everyone else is just there to get killed, some more than once. Havoc is there because he's one of the few X-Men from First Class they decide not to kill off screen for some reason. Days of Future Past does a good job juggling its insane amount of characters, but many feel completely unnecessary and thrown in because Fox wanted to do its own Avengers as well as it could. And to its credit, that's what they got. But they also literally add characters here just to die and never put any work into making them more. Star Trek has less characters and makes better use of them. Point for Star Trek.
I can't wait to kick some Romulan ass, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
X-Men Days of Future Past is about a fantasy everyone has. What if you could go back in time and fix your mistakes? It's by far one of the most appealing aspects of time travel. Sure, it would be cool to see the future, but wouldn't it be cool to see what would happen if your life played out differently? What if you had the balls to make that move on the girl you liked? What if you went down a different road that night? What if you listened instead of talked that one time? Or as Mr. Destiny put it, what if you hit the home run on the big game? There is a price to these things, though. All of these embarrassments, missteps, and missed opportunities are vital pieces to the puzzle that is us. There is a lesson to every mistake, and how we choose to move forward with the new knowledge is what makes us who we are now, and not who we were then. I look back at old pictures of myself and wish I had my younger body, but I would never go back to that state if it also meant reverting to my younger mind. Decades of lessons have taught me things that I would risk losing if I just went back and undid things I had done before. That is something Days of Future Past understands well. We can't change who we were then, just who we are now. The way they change the past is not to alter events. The world falls apart after Mystique kills Bolivar Trask. Charles could just take over her mind and prevent her from killing him. But what would happen then? Perhaps she is arrested, only to escape and kill him at a later time. No, what Charles has to do is convince her that killing Trask is a mistake. She has to decide for herself whether to go through with it or not.
Just because someone stumbles, loses their way, it doesn't mean they're lost forever. Sometimes we all need a little help.
Charles and Eric represent the choice Mystique has to make. Charles thinks mercy and talk are the best ways to peace. Eric thinks violence and slaughter are the only way. The humans have done monstrous things to mutants in this movie. Trask has killed many mutants, including Mystique's friends. Trask does not deserve mercy, but Charles has less interest in saving Trask's life than saving Mystique's soul. He doesn't want Mystique to not kill Trask so he can survive. He wants Mystique to not kill him because she is better than him. If she kills him, she will start down a path that will make her no better than the people who would butcher her and her friends, the people who will destroy the Earth in the future. Mystique must learn, and Charles finds that he must teach her this lesson before it's too late for everyone. Just stopping her isn't enough. She must evolve, and perhaps evolve everyone else with her. The themes within this movie are all about second chances, which work great. But it also proves to be a weak spot too. It seems as though Bryan Singer saw this movie as a second chance for himself as well, and in many ways buried as much as possible of X-Men First Class. When that movie ended, Xavier's X-Men were a team consisting of Banshee, Havoc, and Beast. Meanwhile, Magneto had the Brotherhood of Mutants, with White Queen, Mystique, Angel, Riptide, and Azazel. Then, between movies, all of them die except Xavier, Beast, Havoc, Magneto, and Mystique. The teams have all disbanded. Magneto is imprisoned. Xavier is a drug addict in his mansion. The whole thing feels like Singer desperately trying to wipe out Vaughn's X-Men film, which is an outright shame since it is the best movie with the word X-Men in the title. Singer is cutting off his nose to spite his face. Star Trek is similar in its theme, but not identical. Star Trek is about new beginnings. The movie begins with the birth of Kirk happening concurrently with the Narada entering the timeline and destroying the Kelvin and killing Kirk's father. It's all designed to give a restart to things, but nobody here knows exactly what will happen.
Nero's very presence has altered the flow of history, beginning with the attack on the USS Kelvin, culminating in the events of today, thereby creating an entire new chain of incidents that cannot be anticipated by either party.
So it's not a second chance like in Days of Future Past. The deleted scene also showed the birth of Spock, and while that might have helped with the idea of new beginnings, I also have no idea how you cut that into the beginning without interrupting the pace. Sadly, rather than focus on this theme, it quickly devolves into a big bad guy ship blowing up things. The huge coincidence of Kirk's escape pod landing on a planet with both Spock Prime and Scotty is such a contrivance. There is a deleted line in the script that was supposed to have Spock Prime notice this and tell Kirk that this is the timeline's way of correcting itself. That would explain the contrivance, but hurt the theme. However, I'm not sure if the theme is really intentional. The screenwriters, Alex Kurtzman and Roberta Orsi, do not strike me as guys who try to add layers to their movies. Maybe they're going over my head, though. I'm certain Transformers Revenge of the Fallen and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 are really intellectual think pieces.
I am directly below the enemy scrotum.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
Days of Future Past has a ton of story issues, but at least it's clear what it wants to tell and has a bit more to it than looking cool. Orsi and Kurtzman make Simon Kinberg look like William Shakespeare in comparison. Point for Marvel.
I've been trying to control you ever since the day we met. And look where that's got us. Everything that happens now is in your hands.
There's some really solid action in Days of Future Past. That Quicksilver scene, the whole stadium bit, the big final battle with the Sentinels in the future, it's really some awesome stuff. But it's also unfair to use this category because I won't consider Star Trek an action franchise per se. There is usually action, but with a message or idea behind it. Khan's self-destructive revenge. How fragile peace can be torn down by some racist. How our ever-evolving technology may evolve on its own. Hell, even Star Trek V, with its goofy question to start its ending action.
What does God need with a starship?
There's usually a reason for the action in a Star Trek movie, so to judge it fairly, you have to ask what the action means. What is the message to this? Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, the message here is to be more like Star Wars. Maybe that's the moral to it. We've become more brain dead as a society, and we have to make our more thoughtful media more action heavy to make the big bucks. Somehow I doubt that's intentional. As it is, this is a more straightforward action movie than most any other Star Trek movie, so it ends up being judged on those merits alone. And to its credit, it's got a lot of great beats.
The species is even weaker than I expected. You can't even speak. What?
I got your gun.
The space battles all look cool, and so does the fight on the drill. In fact, I would say most of the action here is better than Days of Future Past, with the exception of the Quicksilver scene, which begs the question if that scene is enough to carry the point for Marvel. It's awesome, but I have to answer no. Point for Star Trek.
Captain, what are you doing?
You show them compassion may be the only way to earn peace with Romulus. It's logic, Spock. Thought you'd like that.
No, not really. Not this time.
Visually, Star Trek 2009 looks great. The lens flares get a bit ridiculous. Seriously, JJ, did you really think it would be cool to have a lens flare pop up every 10 seconds? Other than that, the battles look cool. The ship interiors look like they could have been designed in the 60s, which helps to link this to the original series, but also looks modernized, so it looks like it's from the 60s and the future all at once, which is a tricky balancing act that this movie pulls off quite well. It essentially has to reinvent the wheel while still paying homage to the original as much as possible, and pulls it off as well as anyone could. Days of Future Past has some surprisingly bad visuals. Very fake-looking CGI and super obvious blue screens stick out. There are some non-computer-generated highlights, though. The whole Quicksilver sequence is fantastic, and perhaps the best scene ever with a speedster. I can't recall anything that compares. Not in Avengers Age of Ultron, not in Justice League, and not in the Flash TV series. The one in X-Men Apocalypse was more impressive and honestly better, but this was the first and the one that set the bar. Days of Future Past has some cool, grim-looking imagery for the future, but then spends most of it in this ruin and in an abandoned warehouse. They could do so much with this future setting, and does just barely more than the bare minimum. The stuff in the 70s, though, looks very genuine. Days of Future Past certainly has its highlights, but in the end, Star Trek really does an amazing job with all its visuals. Outside the excessive lens flares, all the visuals here are outstanding. Point for Star Trek.
To boldly go where no one has gone before.
Days of Future Past has a fine score by John Ottman, who scored all the X-Men movies directed by Bryan Singer. He did the original X-Men score, and really his original theme is the highlight here. There is the occasional moment here and there, but for the most part, it's just fine.
Restrain him.
Nothing more, nothing less. The Star Trek score was by Michael Giacchino, and it's fine as well. What he does do that is very cool is during the end credits, he incorporates an orchestral version of the original theme, which is fantastic. In many ways, the score feels like an upgraded version of what the original series music would have sounded like if made now. It's not as good as that makes it sound, but definitely gives it an edge over Days of Future Past. Neither score thrills me, but by incorporating the original Alexander Courage score pieces, Giacchino makes something that has moments of being really awesome. But let's listen to some sound design. Days of Future Past has good sound design that tells the story just fine, lacks any real creativity. Star Trek has amazing sound design and takes elements from the original series and upgrades them for modern day. Point for Star Trek.
Nice timing, Scotty.
I've never beaten 3 people from 2 targets onto 1 pad before.
X-Men Days of Future Past has a lot going for it. I think the Rogue Cut actually has some awesome stuff reincorporated, but also has much worse pacing. I like the bit with Beast and Mystique, but ultimately ends where it did in First Class, making it irrelevant. It was cool to give the future characters more to do, but again, it was irrelevant since the core of the story is what's happening in the past. The future stuff is just a fun return of the original actors, but this is all about the First Class. Well, the ones they decide to keep around anyways. J.J. Abrams does a great job with the Star Trek reboot, even if he makes it a bit too much like Star Wars. You can't really blame him. Kurtzman and Orci are rubbish screenwriters. They can come up with good moments, but that's about it. After Star Trek Beyond, I would have been much happier Simon Pegg and Doug Jung had written all these movies instead of just the one. They clearly know who these characters are and respect them. These are 2 incarnations of their respective franchises that are very likely to end soon. With negotiations for Chris Pine to reprise Kirk over, it looks as though Star Trek Beyond may be the last Star Trek movie until Paramount figures out what to do next, which is a real shame since Beyond finally felt like they found a solid footing for these movies. This incarnation of X-Men is getting wildly old and stale to the point where they are now just remaking older movies. So much of the upcoming Dark Phoenix just looks like The Last Stand 2.0. Pretty much all Fox properties are being merged into Disney, including X-Men and Fantastic Four. It's highly unlikely Kevin Feige will be interested in folding this continuity into the MCU, especially since of the 6 main X-Men movies to be released, all but one of them have been directed by someone implicated in the Me Too movement. Not a good track record at all. Granted, 4 have been directed by one man, and I guess considering his friends and previous reports,
I work with him on The Usual Suspects. We've been friends for years, and we developed the role very much with him in our minds.
It can't come as too much of a shock. If you wonder which is the odd man out, it's Matthew Vaughn, director of X-Men First Class, the best of the 6. So of course he got kicked out before he could do a sequel. With that messed up history, moving on from this franchise is probably the best move for everyone.
Since my customary farewell would appear oddly self-serving, I shall simply say, good luck.
Hey, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe. That helps me out a lot. And if you really love this video, consider visiting my Patreon page.